What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 7 top 18 quarterback rankings. I've already posted my running backs, wide receivers, defenses. Check those out if you haven't seen them. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. But let's just dive right into the quarterbacks here. Starting off in Tier 1, I have two Tier 1 quarterbacks. It's going to be Lamar Jackson going up against the Buccaneers, and then Jaden Daniels going up against the Panthers. For Lamar here, he is the quarterback 1 in points per game, averaging 23.9 points per game and 4 points per passing touchdown. And you look at the matchup here. It's a very favorable matchup. The Bucs have allowed the third most points per game to the quarterback position. I think Lamar is going to have a great game here. And if you drafted Lamar, obviously he's going to be locked in your lineup every single week. Then I have Jaden Daniels, who is the current quarterback 3 in points per game. He is currently number 2 at the quarterback position in rush yards, and I believe he is number 1 in rushing touchdowns. So Jaden Daniels continues to be a strong play here and had a nice game against a Ravens defense that can potentially be tough. Now, pivoting into Tier 2, going to start off this tier with Josh Allen. And I think long term, for the rest of the season, Josh Allen definitely gets a massive boost with the Amari Cooper trade. I don't know how huge of a role he's going to have in Week 1. I don't know what the chemistry is going to look like, their first game together. It's not a great matchup here against the Titans, but I do think, rest of season in neutral matchups, Josh Allen is going to be right up there with Lamar, with Jaden Daniels competing for that QB1 overall spot. They finally have a true wide receiver 1, and I think Amari Cooper is going to be huge for them. Then after Josh Allen, I have to give this guy respect. It's Baker Mayfield. I've been too low on him in my weekly rankings. I was too low on him in my rest of season rankings. Last week, I didn't like the matchup. Turns out it doesn't matter. He can go out, throw 3 picks, but the volume was there. The touchdowns were there. He's the current quarterback 2 in points per game. He is leading all quarterbacks in passing touchdowns. And even though this Ravens defense, they have the reputation for being kind of tough, they've actually allowed the second most points per game to the quarterback position. So Baker's been balling. The matchup seems favorable. He is my quarterback for this week. Then I have Jordan Love going up against the Texans. He is the current quarterback 4 in points per game. He is number 2 in passing touchdowns despite missing 2 games. So when he's out there, the touchdowns have been there. His weapons, have started to get healthy. Seems like he might be without Dontavian Wicks, but you have Jaden Reed. Christian Watson's back. Romeo Doubs had like the weird 1-week suspension, but he's back, scoring 2 touchdowns. I like Jordan Love here as like a mid-tier QB1 play. Then I have Jalen Hurts going up against the Giants. In his first game back with his weapons, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, he passed for 264 yards, 2 touchdowns. I feel like he's been a little bit underwhelming. It seems like the rushing production isn't quite what it's been in recent years, but I still think he's a solid quarterback 1 play. Definitely going to be helped out, with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. And then the final guy in this tier, it's going to be Joe Burrow going up against the Browns. In the last 4 games, which is when he got T. Higgins back, Higgins missed the first 2. In the last 4, Joe Burrow is averaging 23.8 points per game. So he's been balling, showed off the rushing ceiling a little bit in the Week 6 game. Obviously, you're not going to get like a 50-yard rushing touchdown every single week, but it's good to see he kind of has that in his bag, that he can pull out in certain spots. Now, shifting into Tier 3, I already know you guys are going to hate my quarterback 1 here to start off this tier. I have Anthony Richardson. I do think he's going to make his return here. Seemed like they probably could have played him last week, but they're playing it very safe. Obviously, they don't want like their potential future franchise quarterback to get injured, prolong his absence. And I know he's been rough to start off the season. I'm not denying it. He has not been good from a real-life perspective or from a fantasy perspective, but I do still think the upside is there. It's been a pretty small sample size with him as the starter. We know the rushing production is up there with some of the top quarterbacks. He also has Josh Downs. I know he was the starter for, I think, Josh Downs' debut, but this is looking like a pretty solid wide receiver core. Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce has been a big play threat. I think A.D. Mitchell has been interesting, doing a great job commanding targets, getting open, hasn't necessarily converted, but I do think he's going to be better rest of season. So I still have belief in Anthony Richardson as a fantasy quarterback. I don't love him. Actually, I really dislike him for the wide receivers, for Josh Downs, Michael Pittman. I think Joe Flacco is a significantly better option to support those guys. But for Anthony Richardson alone, I do still think he's a solid quarterback play. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think the upside's there, and I'd be willing to play him here as my quarterback 8. Then I have C.J. Stroud in this tier. Kind of a disappointing start to the season. He had all these great weapons, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. He's the current quarterback 14 in points per game. Also, not a great matchup here against the Packers. They've allowed the 8th fewest points per game to the quarterback position. So I still think CJ Stroud is like a fine back end quarterback one play. Obviously, the Nico Collins injury hurts, but he's still a very good NFL quarterback. The passing production is going to be there. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Kyler Murray. And I will say this ranking is kind of going to be dependent on the Marvin Harrison Jr. injury. If Marv cannot go here in week 7, I probably drop Kyler Murray somewhere into tier 4. I just think that weapon room is looking really rough without Marv. It's pretty much Trey McBride, and then like the wide receiver room doesn't have a ton going on. So we'll wait and see about that. Right now, he's going to slide in here in tier 3 as my quarterback 10. Now shifting into a pretty large tier 4 here. Going to start off this tier with Brock Purdy. He's going up against the Chiefs. He's coming off a Thursday night game where he threw for 255 yards, 3 touchdowns. He has all his weapons healthy, minus CMC. George Kittle's been balling. Debo's had some big games. Ayuk hopefully figures it out at some point, but I think he's a nice back-end QB1 play. Then I have Geno Smith going up against the Falcons, actually back-to-back quarterbacks in that same matchup. Geno at number 12, Big Kirko at number 13. For Geno here, he is leading all quarterbacks in pass attempts and yards, so the volume has been there. He also has the weapons with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, JSN. Then for Kirk here, he's pretty much had like the one monster game, like the 500-yard passing game. But I do think this is a fine matchup here against the Seahawks. Like his weapons, I think, he's a fine fringe QB1 play. Then I'm going to go with Sam Darnold here against the Lions. The Vikings are coming off the bye week. He obviously has the weapons with Jefferson, Jordan Addison. Hopefully he's getting Hawkinson back at some point. But I also think this is a little bit better matchup against the Lions than what we've seen early on. They lost Aiden Hutchinson, which I think is going to be a massive hit to their pass rush there, which is obviously going to help Sam Darnold. So high-end QB2 is where he's going to slide in here. Then I have Drake May going up against the Jaguars. He went out in his NFL debut, first time starting, threw for 3 touchdowns, did have 3 turnovers also, but it was an overall decent fantasy day for Drake May against like a fairly tough Texans defense, and he just has such a nice matchup here against the Jaguars. Not only have they allowed the most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, but it's been by like over 3 points per game. So the Jaguars have been by far and away the worst defense at stopping quarterbacks. So even though Drake May doesn't have the elite weapons, still very green in his NFL career, I do think this is a spot where if you're desperate, your quarterback's on bye, he definitely could be playable. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be Jared Goff, coming off of back-to-back 25-plus point games. I guess the issue here with Jared Goff is that the passing volume really hasn't been there. He has one game with 30-plus attempts. I do think this could be a spot where maybe that changes because the Lions, in this like off game are the underdogs. They're 2.5-point dogs. So maybe a trailing game script, could kind of up that passing volume. Maybe they don't rely quite as much on David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs in the run game. So I still think he's playable as like a high-end QB2, but he just doesn't have a ton of upside. I know the last 2 weeks have been big, but over like a full season, he's just not going to be one of those dudes that's, finishing as like a top 10 fantasy quarterback, especially in like a decent quarterback year, which might not be this year, but I think he's like the quarterback 10 right now. Don't know if he's going to sustain that. And then the final tier here, just 2 quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes going up against the 49ers. Mahomes is the quarterback 24 in points per game. He lost his wide receiver 1 in Rashee Rice. Travis Kelce, starting to have some decent games here. Juju went out, had the big game in week 5. And then, you've got Xavier Worthy, who's probably going to continue to get better and better. But as of right now, I don't know how you start Mahomes with any confidence, especially in a not-so-great matchup against the Niners. And then the final quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, going up against the Patriots. His last 2 games have been his best 2 fantasy games. He has Evan Ingram back, has Brian Thomas Jr., has Christian Kirk. Not the worst matchup here against the Patriots, not a great one either. So if you're super desperate, T-Law is my quarterback 18. But that is going to wrap it up here for my top 18 quarterback rankings. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, drop them down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.